Hey Motley crew, welcome back. Today we're going to be doing a Tales by Moonlight. I'm dibia, nchedochukwu. Pronouns are they, them. Welcome. So, opening up this sacred space, I set the intention that I speak from my highest self, which they and I are one. I speak from the highest truth rooted in love today, with clarity and insight, that when I share my story, as I speak, as you hear me, as you exist in energetic space with me, you may receive healing energy for the awakening of your truth, of your soul. Ise. So, in the last video I did was around the relationships I got into when I was in a unhealed place, where I was still dealing with the energies and the energy streams of trauma that lived within me that had yet to be processed and alchemized into a different and higher vibration. And so I wanted to talk about today, though, jumping around a little bit, my journey from church to spirituality, and sharing my story and my experience in making that transition for myself as someone who, my work and my understanding of the world has a foundation in odinani, which is the traditional Igbo cosmology, spirituality, and way of life and view. And it is also informed by my own experiences and my soul. And so growing up, I grew up in a Catholic church. And growing up in the Catholic church, I always felt like something wasn't right. I would hear a lot of gospels and talks about how anyone who doesn't belong in anyone who doesn't belong in the Catholic Church isn't going into heaven. And even though the church I grew up in was different, it was a Catholic church rooted in African American beliefs, music, and so it was more of a lively, because if anyone has gone to Catholic church, you know that it can get boring. It's very monotone, it's very ritualistic. I learned how to do rituals from the Catholic Church, y'all. They're very ritualistic. You do the same thing in the same order. You stand up, you say words, you sit down, you say words, you hold hands. Like, if that ain't ritualistic, I don't know what is. And so being and growing up in that framework and view of the world of Christianity, I always felt off. I always felt like this wasn't really for me. As a kid, I would be on my knees on the pews after getting the body of Christ and the blood of Christ. Again, ritualistic, y'all. And I would just be on my knees praying, like, I want to have a relationship with God. I want to know God. I want to hear God. I want to experience God. And really seeking that deep connection to the Creator, to spirit. It was a deep desire that I had as a kid. And I didn't get that necessarily in the church. What I got from the church was a lot of trauma that was really placed upon me, a lot of shame and guilt that I had to live through, and a lot of fear. I grew up hearing like that my worth was based on my virginity, that what was between my legs was what created my sense of value, not only in society, but for this future unknown man I would be marrying, that I had to obey my parents and respect my parents, essentially make them the masters of me. As a kid, when I was a very opinionated child. I had my own opinions. I always asked why. I was always seeking the truth, my truth. And church was used, and the church trauma that I experienced was used as a way of keeping me in my place. Was to keep me quiet and docile to the whims and desires of not only my parents, but and how I was meant to be in the world, of what a proper person who exists in a female body was meant to be. And that just never really resonated with me. I always felt off. It didn't feel right. And I would ask questions and I would receive answers that just because. It was never really, I never really got the sense of a deep discussion about the whys of why some of the things in Christianity were believed and the very truth of these beliefs. And so I had it felt very tenuous. I felt very strained, my relationship with the church, because deep inside, I felt like, how could all people be condemned if just because you don't listen or just because you don't believe in this particular way of being? And there was one particular Sunday where we had this African American pastor come to the church, which we did during Black History Month. We had like a whole Black History Month series in our church. I mean, y'all, it was a different kind of Catholic church, but still Catholic church nevertheless. And I remember him saying, you know, there are many paths. There are many paths to God. Because he himself wasn't a Catholic, or a Catholic priest rather. There are many paths to God. And there was that moment, something clicked within me. It's like, that's what I believe, that there are many paths to knowing the Creator, knowing the divine, and this is just one of them. But because I was raised in a very strict conservative way, I felt so much fear about God, that I was going to hell. You know, it's a big doctrine. If you don't do certain things, if you don't adhere to certain tenets or commandments, that you're going to go to hell. And so I ended up experiencing a lot of fear, a lot of deep fear that if anything I did that didn't fall into line, I would go to hell, to the point where I experienced so many nightmares. Yeah, I would have nightmares about going to hell and burning in hell. And that, to put that on, as a child, to experience that way of seeing and viewing myself, created this deep sense of shame and guilt. And there are so many parts of myself I had to repress in the process of trying not to go to hell, which is a very much a fear-based mentality that I didn't agree with, that didn't resonate with me in a heart level. And so not only was I going through a lot of like, okay, I might be going to hell, and experiencing this idea of like God as this wrathful being. My mom would always say, you have to fear God. And I was like, why? Why? Because he's a jealous God. I just didn't understand why God was jealous. And if he is God, then why does he seem to have the trappings and the failings of humanity if he is so much larger and bigger than we are? And so I began to question a lot, and I kept the questions to myself. You know, I didn't really quite get many of the things in the Catholic Church, even though I did a lot of the sacraments. Like I did, I'm forgetting the words of what these things are called. It was so long ago. The Catholic Church has different steps that you take to initiate yourself into different levels into the church. And I did that up until high school, the different initiations. I think like marriage was the next one. I didn't do that. And eventually when I left my home, that I grew up in at 18, I decided to leave church. I was like, I'm not feeling this. There's something more that is there and out there for me. And so I remained churchless. I remained spiritualist. I didn't have any belief at the time. I didn't know if I even believed in God, honestly. I just knew that the church wasn't for me and that wasn't going to work. And it wasn't until I began to explore different ways of healing myself, then I began to get acquainted to different belief systems on a deeper level. And that experience first started with plant medicine, but even then I still wasn't really there and understanding it. But my spiritual awakening my spiritual awakening started deeply when I got catapulted into a dark night of the soul, into a deep, devastatingly dark, painful, lost place because of the end of my engagement, the end of this relationship that I thought would be forever, that wasn't. And because I had loved this person so much, my ex-fiance, I wanted questions. How could God allow me to love someone so deeply, fall in love, and it not work out? How could I be guided to this person and feel it? Like, I felt so much love for them in that way, and it not work out. How could I have done this, like experienced this? And the end of that relation really broke me open. And it was in the breaking open that was a spiritual awakening, because often in these periods of loss and grief and pain, we can experience spiritual awakenings. That's one way to spiritually awaken, is through loss and through pain. And that was the path that I went through, because it was in the loss that I began to see questions of what else was there. And the questions at first was like, is she gonna come back? Is this gonna work? In the last story, I kind of talk about, going to a different state and asking like a psychic, that my first time seeing a psychic, y'all, about this relationship and trying to figure some stuff out for myself. But it was in that process that I started to get acquainted with what spirit was. And it's interesting because the psychic I went to was actually Christian. And she was trying to get me to go back to church, and I was like, nah, it's not my path. It's not my path. But as I began to get into tarot, I began to watch tarot videos to get curious about, okay, how are they doing this? Like, what does this mean? Like, who are they channeling? They're saying they're channeling, but what is it? What exactly are they channeling? What's the energy? And then beginning to learn and began to open up my eyes about how this world and universe actually operates. I began to come back to this understanding of my soul and what it was that I was meant here to do. Because in the process of going through my dark night of the soul, I was also experiencing a lot of deep-seated traumas that were coming up that needed to be healed. But on a spiritual level, I was also experiencing an awakening of gifts, knowing that I always had these gifts, but I had suppressed them because I didn't accept them. They weren't seen as acceptable. In the church, anyone who had any gifts was considered to be like evil or part of some cults or like witchcraft, or it was always something negative that was placed upon the people who I did hear about that had any like spiritual abilities and gifts. And so when I began to realize I had this deep intuition that there was, my spiritual abilities began to increase and awaken. And I realized I always had these gifts. As a kid, there was one point where I was dropped off at a track meet because I used to run track in elementary school. And I get dropped off this track meet, and I'm walking around, and I'm like looking at I'm looking at the bleachers, trying to like figure out where I'm gonna sit, and I was guided, y'all. I was guided to sit next to this one girl. This one girl who's there, she was actually a girl. It's not like a woman. She was like, I don't know, I was 10. I don't know how old she was, but she looked younger than me. And I sit next to her for some reason. I don't know why, but I do. And I look over and I look at her name tag, and I'm like, she got the same last name as me. That's weird. I don't really have a common last name. And so I decided to ask her questions. And I'm asking her questions about herself. Where you from? Where you live? Who your parents? They together? Y'all, I've always been a little investigator, even as a young child. So I was asking questions. And she's answering, and and like, she's getting closer and closer. And Yeah, I live down the street. I live a couple of blocks away. Wow, you live a couple of blocks away from me at this street. I live on so and so street. Oh, your parents are, questions that she's answering, and I'm like, interesting, odd. And then I asked her a question, like, what do your dad do for a living? She's like, oh yeah, my dad does. And I'm like, interesting. We got the same daddy. Got the same daddy. So I'm like, oh, we got the same daddy. We're sisters. And then she's like, oh, are you, what's your name? And I tell her my name. She's like, oh, you one of the twins? The shock, y'all. The shock on my face to know that I was sitting next to a half-sister that I didn't know anything about. That spirit had guided me to sit next to, in this bleachers, on this day, on this track meet day that we both ran track, to sit next to this little girl who was my half-sister and to meet my half-sister. If that's not spirit and not being guided by spirit, I don't know what is, y'all. And it was that day that I realized there was this whole part of my family that I had nothing about. I didn't know anything about. And so I've always been intuitive. I've always been guided by spirit. And in fact, spirit raised me. When I didn't receive the love and the care, the attention, when I was emotionally neglected and abused, spirit, universe stepped in and took care of me. They gave me the love. They helped me. And so as I was going through my spiritual awakening process and looking back at my life and realizing, oh, throughout it all, I have always been spiritually connected. I have always been intuitive. I've always been gifted. And as I went through these energy healings with the woman who was there to help me release this ex of mine who I'm free of and I've forgiven and moved on from, my gifts were also awakening. And that was the process that I realized, is that as I healed anything that was in the way of me coming into union with myself and my true self, my divine self, my gifts were awakening. And I began to connect with my ancestors, connect to my higher self, my chi. And that process started 4 years ago. And in the process of it starting 4 years ago, my gifts have not only radically increased, but I realized that I had a spiritual calling to be a dibia, to be a shaman, to be a medicine person, to be an energy channel, to be able to wield and use energy, to speak with ascended masters and angels and higher selves and the ancestors and the unseen and the plants. I was able to embody a way of being and existing in the world that previously I heard that only people who were evil could do. And that was such a fear-rooted way. And I realized that the more I leaned into love, the more my abilities grew. That it was actually, yes, there are people with abilities who aren't doing things that they probably shouldn't be doing. But then there are those, many, many of those, who are rooted in the frequency of love and truth, who have these abilities. And so it's interesting because my process went from church to spirituality. I went from church to using crystals and tarot, and I ain't going back. And as I began to understand more about the history of the world, I realized people have been using crystals for thousands of years. Indigenous peoples from all around the world have been using crystals for thousands of years. Tarot is a form of divination, but people have been divining for thousands, tens of thousands of years. Longer than Christianity ever even existed. And that spirituality was in fact not really even about the divination or about the crystals or about any of those things, but it was coming back to God, the creator, the great spirit within, with the understanding that everything has divine essence, everything has spirit, everything has soul. And so I began to understand that it was actually me coming back to myself, coming back to my divine essence within me, my chi, as we call it in Odinani, that was real, that was what spirituality was about. And that my ancestors, the same ones who were deemed to be evil, practitioners of evil and witchcraft and voodoo and juju by the Christian missionaries who came to control the minds and the bodies of the peoples, were actually people who had this deep connection to the divine, not only in themselves, but in nature and everything around them. That, yeah, people gonna people. They're gonna be people who are gonna be doing bad things with the things they have, but not the essence of who we were back then was this connection to self and to heart. And it was in the process of me opening myself up and being curious and being willing to ask questions that I began to understand that this world was much bigger than just church. It was much bigger than just Jesus. That I was interested in the truth of how this world operated. And the truth that I discovered was not only what God was within me, but it was the truth of energy, the truth of our being connected. All of our souls are connected in a collective consciousness. The truth of higher dimensions. And that part of our purpose and reason here is to go and ascend to these higher dimensions, but the only way to get there is through love. It's through the heart. And that spiritual attacks and curses and all of that is real. Spiritual, it's real. It is. But I was just explaining to someone that when you look at a mosquito, right? Mosquitoes suck blood. Mosquitoes spread malaria that kill many, many millions of people a year. Mosquitoes do a lot of things that aren't beneficial to us as humans. And yet they are very much an important part of our ecosystem. But we don't go around calling mosquitoes evil, even though they do all those things. Instead, we put mosquito repellent on and try to keep the mosquitoes away from us. And yet that is the same thing, that is the same view of the spiritual realm, that there are spiritual parasites. There are these beings that do suck our blood, and not blood, it's energy, because they survive off of not our blood, but our fear. And that when I was in the church, I was so rooted in fear and shame and guilt, which is a lower frequency, y'all. It's a lower frequency, and it was keeping me there. And I felt like I was giving my power away to something outside of me, to some God that was out there that I couldn't connect with. I just couldn't connect to that. This idea that I had to just surrender I felt like I had to surrender my power to something external to me, which was interesting because in doing that, it made it easier for me in my real life to surrender my power to people external to me. It was the same ideology, that there exists a God out there who knows everything, who is all-knowing, but they're not here. This is sin. And this idea that I was sin and that I was wrong, really, it really took a blow to my self-esteem, to my self-worth. And when I went to the spiritual path and understood that God was here, the Creator was here, Chineke, as we call in Odinani, was here, was in me. And I was able to call my power back from out there into here, knowing that as long as I connected to my soul and connected to my heart, to my chi, and I honored those who came before me, those are part of my spiritual team, that I would be okay. And I had to learn how to protect myself spiritually and ask for spiritual protection. And so for me, the spiritual journey is not religious. It isn't based off of doctrine or dogma. Even though I talk about Odinani, it's because that's the philosophy that that's the foundation of the house The foundation of the house that I've built on is one of Odinani. But the house, the walls, the windows, the doors, the floor, everything else is of everything else. And I began to understand and realize, wow, we are as people, we're just all one. We are all one, and what humans have done is each culture, each group has had their own religion, has had their own peoples who were connected to these higher ways and higher frequencies of being, who tried to instill knowledge and direction. And then humans took that and created religion and rules and restrictions. And that felt true to me because I experienced it as true. When I was watching these tarot videos, and they're literally, these videos are with thousands of people. They're general videos telling me about my situation, my life, and it's resonating with me. There was truth to that because they're connecting to the collective conscious, and they're connecting to the divine, and they're able to be a bridge. And that's when I was first starting off, and when I do it for others on my TikTok, and I'll start to do it here as well, I realized I was doing the same thing, the experience of it, of allowing myself to be that empty straw so divine energy can flow through me in the form of guidance and words. And that I had to be rooted from here to be the most effective. And so I really had to work through a lot of fear and shame and guilt for me to even get to a place to be proud of being a dibia, to be proud of being an energy channel, to be proud of being an energy master, to be proud of the spiritual abilities that I have, coming from a background where all that was demonized and made to be evil, that my ancestors and the abilities and the knowledge and the wisdom that they carried, the ancient knowledge, y'all. We're talking about knowledge that goes back tens of thousands, hundreds of years. Christianity only goes back 2. I was made to feel shame about that. It all makes sense because for me, when I go back to the history, it's like, yes, the Christian missionaries came because they wanted to control the Africans, to control our minds, to make us less primitive and more like them in their own kind. And didn't see the value and the knowledge that we carried. And as I began to look more into the history, but I also began to get more to spirit, and I became initiated as a dibia, y'all. That was a whole nother experience to become initiated as a shaman. It meant that I had to go through and be apprenticed in the work in which I was meant to put out the world. I had to heal my own trauma through energy, predominantly. It was a holistic framework, but my specialty is in energy work. It's in spiritual work. I had to heal that which in myself, the codependency, the low self-worth, the low self-esteem, the limiting beliefs, the poverty mentality. I had to heal all of the things within me, the chronic illnesses, PMDD, hypothyroidism, so many. I can list all of the things that trauma, its impact had on me. But I had to learn how to heal that as a dibia for myself so then I could do it for others. And that was a very spiritual path because while I have these gifts, I have these abilities, and these gifts and abilities I have are rare, I had to be able to use them and also protect myself. And that was one thing I didn't know I had to do in the church, right? Because in church, I would go and pray to God for help and for protection and spirituality. Not spirituality, but Jesus. Protect me. Once you're under the kind of the umbrella of Jesus protects you. But once I left that umbrella, I had to figure out my own protection. And in the process of doing that, I had to protect myself from the spiritual attacks that others were sending me, from the energies of others. Remember, I tell you, those entities, the more you awaken and see, they will come to you and they'll be attracted to you like a mosquito and try to suck your blood. But this time it's sucking your energy force and feeding off of your fear. And then as I got deeper into the spiritual journey, not only was it just connecting to my soul, not only was it connected to my higher self, it was coming into union with my higher self, coming into oneness with my being. And I realized that was the process of ascension. Coming into oneness with God, with Creator, with Chineke, is a process of coming into union with one's true essence and soul. And I realized that this was the journey I was on until last year, this ascension journey. And in the ascension journey, I realized I had different guides. I had different ascended masters who were guiding me. My main ascension master guide is Guanyin. She's the bodhisattva of love and compassion and mercy. And she was there to teach me to have love, compassion for myself. And forgiveness as well. A big part was forgiving what was done to me, forgiving myself for how I allowed some of those things. I stayed. I realized another ascended master that was with me was Jesus. Jesus. Oh, Jesus. I didn't have to be a Christian to connect with Jesus or his energy. That he was who was a part of my spiritual team. I like to tell my mama that. Jesus and I are cool. We don't got no beef. He loved me, I love him. But I'm not a Christian. I connected with my ascended master, my ancestor, 3,000 years ago. They were an ascended master. Masculinized feminine. It was through them that I trained and apprenticed through spirit to develop the gifts and understanding that I have. The ability that I have to tap into the wisdom of everything. They call it the Akashic Records. I can read the Akashic Records. The knowledge that exists in everything, because everything has spirit. And energy doesn't die, nor is it created. It's always there. The energy that exists now has been there since millions of years and since the beginning of time. And that exists in everything. And so that is an ascended master that I also had through them. They came to me with the name Elohim. And so I've always been guided. When the time came, these ascended masters came to me to help me in my ascension process. So that not only do I am connected to my chi, I am in embodied alignment with my chi. My chi and I are one. When I speak to you now, I'm speaking from a place of higher self. In this spiritual journey, because I decided to seek truth, I wanted to seek truth. I wanted to seek the truth and feel it for myself, but also know the truth of the universe and how this world works. Led me to a place of enlightenment, which I just experienced recently, this year. And ascension. I'm in the last stages of ascending. Being able to see the truth of this world beyond the veils and illusions. And also come into oneness. In oneness with everything. As a ascended master. This experience, this journey of going from Christianity and Catholicism and giving my power away to God and to now hearing God. Remember as a kid, I used to pray. I wanted to hear God so bad. I wanted to hear God so bad. I was like, God, why you put me in this family? Why did I have to go through this family? As I must have been adopted. There was no way that these people were mine. To now my spiritual abilities. One of my main ones is clairaudience. I can hear spirits. I can hear. My higher self, God, Chineke. I can hear ancestors. I can hear beings. I receive visions. I am clairvoyant. I see things. kind of like an overlay. Like I see the world, but there's another layer beneath it that I can peer into when I so choose. I don't have, I'm not constantly seeing like energies flying around and all that. It's more subtle than that. I'm claircognizant. I get knowings. There are times when I'm just walking around and bloop, information out of nowhere just drops into my head. I just know. I know without knowing. I see without seeing. I can hear without hearing. I'm clairsentient, which is what many people actually have. I used to call it empathy, and I realized it's not empathy. My ability to feel other people's emotions goes beyond just feeling their emotions. It's be able to feel the emotion, understand why they're feeling what they're feeling, where it's coming from, and I can also help transmute that emotion to something else. I mentioned that I am a channel, so when I'm sitting here talking to you, I'm a straw that allows divine energy of the highest frequency to come through. And it comes through my voice. It comes through my energy field, because each one of us has an energy field. In Odenani, we call it mo, the part of you, the felt part of you, the essence that is felt, like the essence from a sun or the sun rays. Your mo is what comes out of you. And again, I mentioned I can channel higher frequencies and beings and entities. And I wouldn't have been able to get here if I wasn't curious enough or open enough to seek truth. If I didn't allow myself to say, this doesn't feel right, I'm gonna ask questions or research and figure out something else, allow myself to be guided in a different direction. And it took, when I went to Nigeria to visit family, y'all, I remember saying I wasn't a Christian, and people were like, "Who? You're not a what? A who? You're not what? What do you believe in?" It was just like I cursed them by saying I wasn't a Christian. And I remember my dad would be like, "Don't listen to them. They're just playing." Like, "No, I'm not. I am not playing. I am not a Christian. Don't get it twisted. I have no shame. No shame. Don't bring that over here. I am not." And even now, I'm so different from my family in my beliefs and in my experiences, in the direction in which I have chosen to take. I still, when I left the church, it caused a lot of tension between my mother and my parents. But it was in the process of doing that and me standing firm that I actually found out that I was descendant of a lineage of dibias. I didn't know that. I was descendant of people with strong spiritual abilities that were hidden from me. But it was because of when I started to share my experiences. And the thing is, because I started to share my experiences, that I heard a parent say, "Oh yeah, grandpa went through this one time. He was in church and someone cursed him. He got blind and he went into the bush. And in the bush, he was guided by a voice to take this plant and put it in his eyes. And then the thing that had cursed him fell out." Y'all, juju is real. Witchcraft is real. And when I say witchcraft, I'm talking about just people who use energy and use it for a purpose. Yeah, he was able to do that. He was able to do what? Why am I just learning this? Now that but that was the thing, because it was hidden in my own family lineage, because it wasn't church-like. So people were going behind the scenes, going to these dibias and going to this and believing these things alongside going to church. I mentioned that I was trained, apprenticed under ancestors from 3,000 years ago. So it's in my blood. And I was chosen from my ancestors to carry on and to activate those latent abilities and the latent connection to be as a medicine person, an energy master, a channeler, to bring this into the lineage, not only for my own benefit, but to heal my ancestral lineage. And so spirituality for me has opened up a whole universe of seeing and being and believing that I didn't even know existed being in the church. And once my eyes started to be open, I couldn't close them again. My spiritual awakening, when I began to awaken to the truth of this world and the truth of my soul, I couldn't go back to sleep. But I always felt something within me that was telling me, this ain't it. Y'all know my favorite phrase, this ain't it. And once I figured out what was, I felt the truth. The truth, the energy of truth is felt. You can lie. I can lie and sit here and lie. But you will be able to feel the truth of what I'm saying, or the not truth of what I'm saying. And so in my own experiences in moving from the church to spirituality, it really had to do with healing the church trauma and allowing myself to be open to asking questions and experiencing the universe and the magic of the universe for myself. I wanted to see for myself. I wanted to have my own experience. I didn't want someone else telling me how God was, or God is this, or this is how you should relate to God. I wanted to relate to God myself. I wanted to develop my own connection to the universe. And I have. I'm so grateful that I did. And I know it took me being brave and courageous enough to step outside the confines of what I knew and what my family knew and what they were comfortable with, to really face backlash from them and say, you know what? This is my truth. My truth is that this thing y'all doing called Christianity doesn't feel true. And that is the thing with all religions, organized religion, that people, humans, brought together to say this is it. Because I went back to that part when I was in the church in Mass, and the pastor said, the African American pastor said, there are many paths to God. And we are all called to different paths. Because that felt true to me. I knew that wasn't my path, not the church. There was something more for me. And I found that more. And my ability to understand the universe, but also come into connection with my soul. And through the ancestral wisdom and knowledge in my bloodline. Or did not need in my bloodline. Our traditional ways of being and experiencing and living in the world. That is what felt true. Y'all, like I had such an intense awakening, and I think in the process of awakening and being able to see the ways in which this society is created, that is relied on, it's based on, it's all illusion in the sense that it's all made up. Like, humans came together and said this is the way the world should be. And it's so far from how things actually work and the understanding of it. I began to realize that I could live life differently. I didn't have to live a 9 to 5. I didn't have to do all these things because that's not what my soul wanted me to do. I wasn't being called to that. There was something more and different for me. But I had to connect to my soul and allow my authentic self to come through. That true essence within. And it was through that purpose I realized I had a mission. I have a destiny. I have a destiny. That I was called, that I incarnated into this world to fulfill out from a soul purpose. So that's where we are, y'all. In terms of my process from church to spirituality to being a dibia, to to now, I'm kind of a multi-spiritualist. I believe there are truths in everything. There are truths in all of the ways in which humans have tried to understand the universe, shineke. And then there's also experience of it. And I have my own. And so I'm going to stop there. A little burpy de burp, which happens when I open myself up like this. And the energy, for me, it's like it's negative energy, low vibration energy releasing, that I'm releasing in the process of sharing. So thank you all for being here with me. I don't ever take it for granted wherever, whenever you are. Appreciate you. Like and subscribe, share if it's a vibe. Donate if you're called by the spirit of generosity to do so. And with that, close out this circle. So take care. Be well with love.